Brian Hooker sure seems like he's expected to end up in court maybe soon, right? I say that because since returning to the United States a little over a week ago, Brian has hired a new attorney to battle the allegations that he's somehow responsible for his wife Lynette Hooker's disappearance. And that attorney is already fighting back. During an interview with ABC News, Crystal Hauser asked the public to give her client the benefit of the doubt. Now, that may be tough for people to do, as Brian has seemingly been under a very large cloud of suspicion since day one. Remember, Lynette vanished on April 4th while...
A woman steps into a small boat with her husband. It is a calm evening on one of the most beautiful stretches of water in the Caribbean. 10 minutes later, her husband says she is gone. Fallen overboard, swallowed by the sea, lost to waves, he says, were screaming. He says he tried. He says he drifted for 9 hours. He says she had the keys. He says he loved her. But here is what no one can explain. Her watch made it back to the boat. She didn't. And that watch, it may have just broken Brian Hooker's entire story wide open. And this is Hidden Crime Files. Today we go deep into the disappearance of Lynette Hooker, the case the internet cannot stop talking about, the evidence that keeps mounting, and the one detail that may ultimately seal this investigation. If you are new here, subscribe right now and hit the like button. This case is moving fast and every update drops on this channel first. You do not want to miss what comes next. Stay with us. This one does not end where you think it does. Elbow Cay sits inside the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas, a narrow strip of land surrounded by water so clear you can see the bottom at 15 feet. Sailboats anchor off its western shore in the calm, sheltered lee of the island. It is the kind of place people save for years to visit. For Brian and Lynette Hooker, it was home. The couple had been living aboard their 46-foot sailboat, Soulmate, for 4 years. On the evening of Saturday, April 4th, the two of them were at the Abaco Inn on Elbow Cay, having drinks, relaxing, doing what sailors do when they come ashore. At approximately 7:30 p.m., they untied their dinghy from the inn's dock, climbed in, and headed back toward Soulmate, anchored roughly 12 minutes away, just south down the island toward Tahiti Beach. They never arrived together. According to Brian, somewhere in those 12 minutes, approximately 150 meters off the western shore of Elbow Cay, Lynette fell off the back of the dinghy. He says he tried to reach her. He says the wind was howling, the waves 2 to 4 feet. He says she had grabbed the dry bag, the one holding both their passports, the dinghy's electric key, and her phone. He says it all happened so fast he couldn't save her. Brian Hooker claims he then drifted alone through the night, crossing the Sea of Abaco for 9 hours, finally washing ashore on Marsh Harbor, 4 miles away, the following morning. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Brian's account rests on a specific set of conditions: rough seas, a howling wind, failing visibility, and a chain of bad luck that made rescue impossible. He says the waves were 2 to 4 feet. He says he lost one of his oars, the paddles used to maneuver the dinghy. He says he threw the green flotation cushion from the side of the dinghy toward Lynette, though he doesn't know if she caught it. He says she had the only key to the engine. He says he searched. He says he called out. He says he watched her disappear. That is the story. Now here is what does not fit. Brian told fire and rescue volunteers the following morning that Lynette was wearing a 2-piece black bathing suit. That was it. When pressed, when first responders asked him again and again what she looked like, what she was wearing, "Give us anything," that is all he offered. A black 2-piece. But investigators obtained an exclusive photograph, a selfie taken by Lynette herself less than 2 hours before she vanished, at the pool at the Abaco Inn. In that photo, Lynette is wearing a bright blue headscarf, a green bathing suit cover-up, what appears to be a black fanny pack, and on her wrist a powder pink Apple Watch. Brian mentioned none of it. Not the headscarf, not the cover-up, not the pack. not the watch. When a wife goes missing, a husband should be able to describe what she was last wearing down to the smallest detail. Brian gave search and rescue almost nothing. Friends of Lynette's have described their reaction to this as pure rage. Blaine Stevenson and his wife Marn, fellow sailors who knew the couple, have been working around the clock trying to piece this case together. The clothing detail alone has left them, and many others, without words. Brian Hooker's entire account depends on weather. 2 to 4 foot seas, screaming wind, conditions so brutal that a trained, capable man couldn't get a life jacket on his wife. There were 2 life jackets in that dinghy when fire and rescue found it the next morning, both unused. Multiple witnesses who were on the water that same evening, some making the same route along that same western shore, have stated plainly that the conditions Brian described did not exist. Not at 7:30 p.m. One woman was piloting her dinghy along that exact stretch of water that exact night. She said there is no way she and her husband would have gone out if the sea had been what Brian described. Video footage from that night has been reviewed. The wind was blowing in a southerly direction toward the west. It was not a storm. The western shore of Elbow Cay, the lee side of the island, is protected by geography. Boats anchor there because it is calm. It is why Soulmate was anchored there. The conditions Brian describes would have required weather that simply was not present on that side of the island that night. This matters enormously, because if the weather was calm, the story of a woman swallowed by rough seas in the dark falls apart at its foundation. Here is where this case shifts. Lynette Hooker loved her powder pink Apple Watch. Her daughter Carly Ellsworth confirmed it. Lynette used it constantly, including the Find My Phone feature she relied on to locate her iPhone. The battery had been weakening. It could no longer hold a charge long enough for overnight sleep tracking. So Brian had purchased a replacement, a technical marine watch. When Carly visited the boat about 6 weeks before her mother disappeared, that new watch didn't fit Lynette. Brian said Carly could have it. She forgot it on the boat's charger when she left. The powder pink Apple Watch stayed on Lynette's wrist. After Brian's arrest, the Royal Bahamian Police boarded Soulmate and recovered Lynette's Apple Watch from the sailboat. Now sit with that. Brian's own account says neither of them made it back to Soulmate that night. Lynette went overboard. Brian drifted for 9 hours and washed up on Marsh Harbor. Soulmate was never reached. According to Brian, nobody touched that boat until authorities did. So how did Lynette's Apple Watch, which she was photographed wearing hours before she disappeared, end up on Soulmate? She didn't make it back. He says he didn't make it back. But her watch did. If you're not subscribed yet, do it right now and hit the like button. Because what we are about to show you next is the detail that investigators may not be able to ignore. Stay with us. And there is more. Lynette's Apple Watch was synced to her iPhone. The 2 devices were connected. Soulmate had Starlink, a satellite internet system mounted high on the mast, which means it connects to devices from a significant distance. If Lynette's phone or watch came back aboard that boat and connected to the Starlink network, that connection would have been logged. Investigators call this digital exhaust, the invisible trail your devices leave behind whether you intend them to or not. If those devices connected to Soulmate's Starlink that night, the timestamp alone could reconstruct exactly what happened and when. Brian says he lost one of his paddles in the chaos. For weeks, no one knew where it went. In a body of water as contained as the Sea of Abaco, essentially a large, shallow lagoon, objects don't simply disappear. They wash up somewhere. A paddle has now reportedly surfaced, found by neighbors on the shore of Lubber's Quarters, the island that sits directly in the path between Elbow Cay and Marsh Harbor. They retrieved it, showed it to police, and confirmed it resembled the paddle on board Soulmate. It has not been officially confirmed as Brian's. but its location is critical. The wind on the night of April 4th was blowing south and west. That is the direction toward Lubber's quarters. That is exactly where a floating object partially submerged, catching current more than wind would logically travel. Here is the problem. Brian didn't end up on Lubber's quarters. He ended up on Marsh Harbor 4 miles north, past Lubber's entirely. A dinghy floating above the waterline catches wind. Wind pushed south and west toward Lubber's. Brian somehow traveled north to Marsh Harbor. His paddle, if it is his, did exactly what the wind and current would predict. Brian did not. How does a man in an open boat, adrift in the same body of water on the same night with the same wind, end up in the opposite direction from everything else that was floating with him? One object did travel the same path as Brian. The green flotation cushion, the one he says he threw toward Lynette. Fire and rescue volunteers returned to Marsh Harbor 2 days after Brian washed ashore and found it on the same stretch of beach, about 100 yards south of where the dinghy had grounded. A rescue volunteer videotaped himself retrieving it and identified it on camera as matching the cushion Brian described. Brian was told about this. His response that it was incredible to think the two of them had floated all that way, 100 yards apart, was sent by text to the fire and rescue representative who found it. So the dinghy made it to Marsh Harbor. The cushion made it to Marsh Harbor. Brian made it to Marsh Harbor. But the paddle went south to Lubber's quarters. Lynette's dry bag has never been found. Lynette has never been found. One other detail about Lubber's quarters. A homeowner on that island says he does not swim off his own dock. The reason: consistent bull shark activity along that eastern shoreline, which he observes regularly. This does not answer what happened to Lynette Hooker, but it is part of the geography of where this story took place. In the hours after Lynette disappeared, Brian Hooker was surrounded by people who wanted to help find her. Fire and rescue volunteers mobilized before dawn. They asked him everything they needed: what she was wearing, any identifying details, anything that could help spot her in the water or on a shore. He told them she had on a black two-piece bathing suit. That was it. No headscarf, no cover-up, no fanny pack, no pink Apple Watch, no sunglasses. He also told the search coordinator he wanted to rent a boat so he could search himself. The coordinator gave him a contact number. Brian never called it. That has been verified. He did not join the search. He did not ask how many boats were out. He did not ask where the command center was. Brian had told people publicly he would never leave the Bahamas without Lynette. He said he would keep searching. He left on an emergency passport the day after his release from Bahamian detention. Everything in this case generates data. Lynette's Apple Watch, her iPhone, the Starlink system on Soulmate's mast. Brian's own technical marine GPS watch, the one he wore every single day, the one that left a stark tan line on his wrist when police removed it at arrest, the one he was photographed retrieving from the police facility the morning after his release. The Royal Bahamian Police did not seize Brian's watch as evidence when they released him. Whatever GPS route data, waypoints, or location history that watch recorded on the night of April 4th may still exist on it, or may have already walked out of the Bahamas with him. Lynette's Apple Watch is in investigators' hands. Whether its data has been fully extracted, and what that data shows, has not been publicly confirmed. But here is what digital exhaust does. It records. It doesn't misremember. It doesn't give rescue workers an incomplete description. It doesn't forget a bright blue headscarf. It simply logs what happened, where, and when. If Lynette's devices came back aboard Soulmate that night and connected to the Starlink network, even briefly, that connection has a timestamp. And that timestamp places someone on that boat at a time when Brian says no one was there. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Brian Hooker has not been charged. The investigation is ongoing. But here is where things stand tonight. The weather doesn't match his story. The paddle went the wrong way. The watch shouldn't be on the boat. The search was never joined. And the digital trail is sitting in the hands of investigators right now, waiting to be fully read. Witnesses who were at the Abaco in the night of April 4th have now been identified. They saw Brian and Lynette. They photographed the dinghy at the dock. That footage is being reviewed. What they captured and what it shows is what we cover next. Subscribe now and hit the like button so YouTube sends you the next episode the moment it drops. Then drop a comment below with one word. Do you believe Brian Hooker? Hidden Crime Files. The truth is always closer than they think.